She believed in beautiful love stories, but she never expected to live one. He seemed as if he had stepped right out of a romance novel, charming, sweet, and completely captivated by her. But not every perfect love is safe from reality, and when their world begins to fall apart, their hearts are tested in the cruelest way. The top shelf was mocking her. Harper Lennox stretched as far as her body allowed, fingers reaching toward the worn spine of the book she had been hunting for 3 weeks. Her toes ached inside her flats. The edge of the shelf pressed against her wrist. Still not enough. She exhaled through her teeth and tried once more, the sleeve of her cream sweater riding up past her elbow. The bookstore smelled the way it always did, old paper and cedar, with a faint trace of the coffee they brewed near the register. She had been coming here every Saturday since she moved back to the city, and somehow this particular copy of The Age of Innocence had always been checked out or misplaced. Today she had spotted it the moment she turned the corner into the classics aisle. Top shelf, pushed all the way to the back. She was about to give up when warmth pressed close behind her. Not touching, just close enough that the air between them changed. She caught a scent, clean like soap and something woodsy underneath, and then a hand reached past her shoulder, long fingers closing around the spine of the book with no effort at all. The hand brought it down to her eye level. Harper smiled before she turned around, the kind of smile that starts as gratitude and becomes something softer, shyer, the moment it reaches the eyes. Then she turned. The smile froze. He was tall. That was the first thing. The kind of tall that made the aisle feel smaller. Broad shoulders beneath a dark grey coat, jaw cut sharp, hair pushed back in a way that looked careless, but probably wasn't. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Brown, warm, and holding an expression she couldn't name. Something between surprise and recognition, as if he had been looking for her without knowing it. Harvey Langford had walked into the store to kill 20 minutes before a dinner reservation he didn't care about. He hadn't been looking for anything. He certainly hadn't expected to turn into the classics section and find a woman on her toes, stretching toward a shelf, with a strand of dark hair falling loose across her neck. If this story is touching your heart, show your support, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. He reached for the book because it was the obvious thing to do. What wasn't obvious was the way his chest tightened when she turned around. Her face was... He didn't have words for it yet. Soft, unguarded. The kind of face that didn't try to be anything other than what it was. And those eyes, light brown, almost golden in the glow of the overhead lamp, looking up at him like he had just appeared out of thin air. A few seconds passed. Neither moved. The sounds of the store continued around them. A page turning somewhere behind the shelves, the low hum of a radiator, the muffled bell above the front door. But between them, nothing. He spoke first. "That's one of my favorites, too." His voice came out lower than he intended. Quieter, as though speaking any louder might break whatever had settled between them. Harper blinked. "You've read it?" "Twice?" He paused. "The ending wrecked me both times." A real smile now. The shy one was gone, replaced by something brighter, the kind that reached past her lips and changed the whole shape of her face. "Most people never even pick it up. Most people don't know what they're missing." He was still holding the book out to her. She took it and her fingers brushed against his. A small thing, barely a touch. But he felt it travel all the way up his arm, settle somewhere beneath his ribs, and stay. They talked in the aisle for 10 minutes, then 15. She leaned against the shelf with the book pressed to her chest, and he stood with one hand in his coat pocket, trying to look relaxed while his pulse did something it hadn't done in years. She told him she was a translator. He told her he was a dentist. She laughed, a short, surprised sound, and said she never would have guessed. He asked what she would have guessed. She tilted her head, thinking, and said maybe a professor. Or an architect. Something with that serious face of his. He almost told her that his face was only serious because he was trying very hard not to stare. Instead, he said there was a cafe 2 doors down that made the best coffee on this side of the city. "Would you like to go with me?" The question hung between them. Harper looked at the book in her hands, then back at him. His eyes hadn't moved from her face. Not once. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." The cafe was small and warm, tucked between the bookstore and a florist whose roses spilled color onto the sidewalk. They sat at a table near the window, and the steam from their cups rose between them like a slow, quiet curtain. He ordered black coffee. She ordered chamomile tea. He raised an eyebrow. "Tea? In a cafe?" "I like tea," she said simply, wrapping both hands around the cup. "Coffee makes my hands shake." Noted. She caught the way he said it, like he was filing it away somewhere important, like he intended to remember. They talked about books first, then about everything else. She told him about growing up with a father who read to her every night until she was 12. He told her about the summer he spent reading every novel in his grandmother's attic because he had broken his arm and couldn't do anything else. She laughed again. He decided it was the best sound he had heard in a very long time. An hour passed without either of them noticing. When the cafe began to empty and the light outside turned amber, Harvey looked at her across the small table and felt something shift. Not dramatic, not loud. More like a door opening in a room he didn't know he had. She was stirring the last of her tea with a small spoon, her eyes soft, her lips slightly parted, and he thought, without meaning to, without permission, that he could sit across from this woman every evening for the rest of his life and never once feel the need to be anywhere else. Harper looked up and caught him watching her. She didn't look away, neither did he. Outside, the city moved on without them. Cars, voices, the distant bark of a dog in the park across the street. But inside that cafe, at that small table, something had begun. Something that neither of them fully understood yet. Something that would change everything. 3 weeks after their first coffee, Harvey stood in his kitchen chopping onions and losing an argument. "You are not paying for groceries," he said without looking up from the cutting board. "You're a guest." Harper leaned against the counter with her arms crossed. "I've been here 4 times this week. That's not a guest. That's a tenant. A tenant pays rent. You bring books. That's better." She opened her mouth to argue, but he turned and pointed the knife, gently, handle tilted toward her, and gave her a look so serious it almost worked. Almost. The corner of his mouth betrayed him. "Put the wallet away, Harper. I haven't even taken it out. You were thinking about it. I can tell." She laughed. And there it was again. That sound that did something to the rhythm of his breathing every single time. He turned back to the onions quickly, because if he kept looking at her while she laughed like that, he was going to burn the garlic. Their relationship hadn't started slowly. It had started like a sentence that was already halfway written, as though the first chapters had happened somewhere before they met, and the bookstore was simply where they picked up the story. By the second date, they had stopped pretending there was anything casual about what was happening. By the end of the first month, she had a toothbrush at his place, and he had memorized the exact shade of her tea. But it was the small things that built the architecture of them. He had a habit. When the wind caught her hair and pulled a strand across her face, his hand would move on its own, reaching over, tucking it behind her ear, his thumb brushing the curve of her jaw for just a second longer than necessary. She would go still when he did it. Not stiff, just still, as if the touch had pressed pause on everything else. She never told him what it did to her, how such a simple gesture could make her feel so completely seen. She just let him do it every time and carried the warmth of it for hours after. He had another habit she pretended to hate. Sit up. She was curled over a manuscript at his kitchen table, red pen in hand, shoulders rounded forward, the way they always got when she was deep into a translation. His palm landed flat against her lower back, broad, warm, steady, and pressed gently until she straightened. "I don't want my angel in pain later," he murmured near her ear. The first time he called her that, they had been walking home from the bookstore on a cold Tuesday evening. She had asked him why he kept looking at her like that, like she had done something extraordinary when all she had done was exist. He had stopped walking, looked at her under the streetlight with an expression so open it almost scared her. "Because you showed up in my life," he said, "and brought something I didn't even know was missing. What else am I supposed to call you?" Angel. He said it like a fact, like a name she had always had but only he could see. She gave him one back. It came a few days later, on a night when he pulled out her chair at a restaurant. ordered for her exactly what she wanted without asking because he already knew, and then reached across the table to hold her hand while they waited for the food. She looked at him and shook her head slowly. "What?" he asked. You're like something out of another century. Is that a complaint? It's a diagnosis." She smiled. "You're a prince, Harvey. A real one." He carried that word with him the way she carried Angel. The months passed. Their life together took shape in the kind of details that only matter to the two people living them. Saturday afternoons at the bookstore became a tradition. She browsed. He followed. Sometimes he read over her shoulder, chin nearly resting on the top of her head, and she would swat him away without any real conviction. Sunday mornings he cooked breakfast, while she sat on the counter reading passages out loud from whatever she was translating that week. Her voice changed when she read aloud, softer, rounder, like she was handing him something fragile. He lived for those mornings. They talked about the future the way people do when they aren't afraid of it. A house with a reading room, 2 kids, maybe 3. A dog she wanted, and he pretended to resist. She talked about translating novels full-time someday. He talked about opening his own practice. They made plans on napkins and in the margins of books, and none of it felt like dreaming. It felt like scheduling. One evening, 11 months in, Harvey sat across from his best friend Marcus at a bar downtown. Marcus Reed was the kind of man who noticed everything and said very little, a quality that made him an excellent detective and an even better friend. He had known Harvey since college, had watched him date women who never lasted past a second month, and had quietly concluded years ago that his friend was either too picky or waiting for someone who didn't exist yet. Then Harper happened. "You're smiling at your phone again," Marcus said flatly, swirling his drink. "She sent me a picture of a dog she saw on her walk." "You hate dogs." "I'm reconsidering." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "You're going to marry this woman, aren't you?" Harvey set the phone down, looked at his friend and said nothing, but the answer was written all over his face. The ring was white gold with a single oval stone. He found it at a small jeweler 3 blocks from his practice on a Tuesday afternoon between patients. The jeweler, an older man with steady hands, asked if he had something specific in mind. Harvey described her. Not the ring. Her. The way her hands looked when she held a book. The way light caught the curve of her fingers when she reached for her tea. The jeweler listened, nodded once, and pulled out the tray. Harvey saw it immediately. He bought it and carried it home in his coat pocket, pressing his hand against it every few steps as if it might vanish. That night he set it in the back of his sock drawer, the most absurd hiding place he could think of, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, already rehearsing words that wouldn't come for weeks. He was going to ask her. He just needed the right moment. What he didn't know, what neither of them could have known, was that the right moment would never come the way he planned, because somewhere across the city, in a dimly lit room, thick with cigarette smoke and quiet desperation, Harper's father was sitting across from a man who smiled like a contract and shuffled cards like a verdict. And the debt was already growing. The smell of old wool and dust hit Harper the moment she opened her father's front door. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and she had come to bring him soup, the same chicken and rice recipe her mother used to make, the one he once said could fix anything. The house didn't look the way it used to. When her mother was alive, every surface had been tended. Fresh flowers on the windowsill, throw pillows arranged on the couch, the faint scent of lavender hanging in the air like a gentle reminder that someone cared. Now the curtains stayed closed, dishes piled in the sink. A thin layer of neglect coated everything, the kind that builds so gradually you don't notice until the light hits it at the wrong angle. "Dad?" she called from the hallway. "In here." Richard Lennox sat in his armchair with the television on, but the volume down. He looked thinner than the last time she visited. His shirt was wrinkled, his jaw unshaven, and his eyes moved to her with a delay that unsettled her. "I brought soup." "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She set the container on the kitchen counter and began heating it. While the pot warmed on the stove, she looked around. The mail was stacked in a pile by the door, some of it unopened, some of it crumpled as if he had started to read it and then thought better of it. Her coffee mug sat on the table with a brown ring dried at the bottom. The calendar on the wall still showed last month. Something twisted in her stomach, a quiet alarm she couldn't name. She carried the bowl to him and sat on the arm of the couch. He ate slowly, without much appetite, but he ate. She watched him and tried to find the man who used to read to her every night, the man who built her a bookshelf with his own hands when she was 9. He was still in there, she told herself, just buried under grief. Her mother's death had been 3 years ago. Cancer, quick, ruthless, merciless. 6 months between the diagnosis and the funeral. Harper had handled it by throwing herself into work, translating longer texts, staying busy until exhaustion forced her to sleep. Her father had handled it by disappearing into himself. She understood it at first. Then she worried. Then she stopped knowing what to feel. "How's the dentist?" he asked, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. "His name is Harvey, Dad." "I know his name. I like calling him the dentist. Makes him sound less important." She almost smiled. Almost. "He's good. He wants to meet you again. Properly this time." Richard had met Harvey once, briefly, when Harvey had come to pick Harper up for dinner. They had shaken hands in the doorway. Harvey had been warm and polite. Richard had been stiff, not rude, just closed, the way he was with everyone now. "We'll see," he said. She didn't push it. She had learned that pushing her father only made him retreat further. On her way home, she called Harvey. His voice picked up on the second ring, and the sound of it unwound something in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. "How is he?" "The same, maybe a little worse." A pause. She could hear him thinking. "Do you want me to come over?" "No. I'm almost home. I just wanted to hear your voice." The silence that followed was warm, full, the kind of silence that only exists between two people who don't need words to say what matters. "I'm here," he said quietly. "I know." That night, she sat at her desk trying to translate a passage from a French novel about a woman who lost everything and rebuilt from nothing. The words blurred. She pressed her fingers against her eyes and breathed. She thought about her mother's hands, soft, always warm, always reaching for hers. She thought about the sound her father's voice used to have when he read to her, the low, steady rhythm that made every story feel safe. She missed that version of him. She missed him the way you miss someone who is still alive, but no longer reachable. The next Saturday, she and Harvey were in their bookstore. She was sitting on the floor between 2 shelves, legs crossed, a stack of novels beside her. He was standing at the end of the aisle pretending to browse, but really watching her. She had this way of reading. Her lips moved slightly when a sentence struck her, forming the words silently as if tasting them. Her lower lip caught between her teeth when she concentrated deeply. Every time she did it, his thoughts scattered like papers in a draft. He crouched beside her. "Find anything good?" She held up a book without looking at him. "This one. The translation is terrible, though. I could do better." "Then you should." She glanced up. The light from the window above caught the amber in her eyes, a detail he had noticed the first day and still hadn't gotten used to. He didn't think he ever would. "You always say that." "Because I always mean it." She held his gaze for a moment, and something passed between them. Not a word, not a gesture, just a current of understanding. She went back to the book. He stayed crouched beside her, one hand resting on his knee, content in the simple fact of being near. Later, walking home, she looped her arm through his and pressed close against the cold. He adjusted his stride to match hers without thinking about it. A habit now. "Harvey. Do you think people can just break? Not all at once, slowly, so slowly they don't notice." He looked down at her. The question wasn't abstract. He could tell by the way she didn't meet his eyes. "I think some people can, but I also think the right person can help them find the pieces again." He paused. "Is this about your dad?" She nodded, her jaw tight. He didn't say anything else. He just pulled her arm closer and pressed his lips to the top of her head. She exhaled against him, and he felt her shoulders release. He filed it away, the weight she carried about her father. He would ask again later when she was ready. For now he held her close and let the silence do the work. What he didn't know was that the breaking had already begun, not slowly, not gently. Somewhere in a room she had never seen, Her father was sitting at a table he couldn't afford, across from a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment, and the cards were already dealt. A car door slammed outside the house at 9:30 on a Thursday night. Harper was in the kitchen drying the last dish from dinner when she heard it. Then another door, and another. She set the plate down and looked toward the living room, where her father sat in his armchair watching nothing. He wasn't watching nothing anymore. His face had gone white, not pale, white. The color of a man who has just heard the sound he has been dreading for months. His hands gripped the armrests so hard the veins rose beneath his skin. "Dad?" He didn't answer. The knock came hard, 3 sharp strikes that rattled the doorframe. Harper moved toward the hallway, but her father was already on his feet, one hand raised toward her. "Don't open it." "Who is it?" "Harper, don't—" The door opened anyway, not because she reached it, but because the man on the other side didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped into the hallway like he owned it, tall, heavy-set, with a face that seemed carved from something cold. His coat was expensive, his shoes were polished. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It sat on his mouth like a mask someone had placed there and forgotten to remove. Behind him, 2 men stood shoulder to shoulder in the doorway, arms folded, blocking the night. Harper took a step back. "Good evening," the man said. His voice was calm, polite even, the kind of calm that feels rehearsed. He looked past Harper and directly at Richard. "We had a conversation, Richard. Several, in fact. You made promises. I'm here because promises mean something to me." Richard's breathing was shallow. He stood behind the couch now as if the furniture could protect him. "I told you I needed more time. You've had time. What you haven't had is money." Harper's pulse hammered in her throat. "Who are you?" The man turned to her slowly. His eyes moved across her face the way someone appraises an object in a store. She felt her skin crawl. "My name is Vincent Hale. Your father and I have a business relationship." He paused, letting the word sit. "Or rather, we did. The terms have changed." "What terms? What business?" Vincent tilted his head. He looked at Richard with something between amusement and contempt. "You haven't told her." Richard said nothing. His silence was loud enough to fill the room. Vincent turned back to Harper. He took one step closer. She could smell his cologne now, heavy, sharp, nothing like the clean warmth she associated with Harvey. Everything about this man felt wrong. "Your father owes me a great deal of money, Miss Lennox, more than he can ever repay. The debts have been accumulating for over a year, and I've been patient. Very patient." He smiled again. "But patience has limits." Harper looked at her father. "Dad, what is he talking about?" Richard's mouth opened, closed. "Games," he whispered. "Cards." The floor tilted beneath her. She had suspected something. The weight loss, the unpaid mail, the slow decay of the house. But gambling, debts. This man standing in their hallway with guards at the door. "How much?" she asked, turning back to Vincent. "More than a number can fix, but fortunately there is another arrangement." He reached into his coat and pulled out nothing. No paper, no weapon. Just the gesture, slow, deliberate, before sliding his hand back into his pocket. A performance. He wanted her to feel it. "You, Miss Lennox, are the payment." The words didn't land right away. They floated for a second, absurd, weightless, like something from a story she might translate but never live. "Excuse me?" "Marriage. To me. That clears the debt. Your father keeps his legs. Everyone moves on." Harper's body went cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from weather. The kind that comes from inside, when something in your mind trips a switch and shuts everything down except survival. "No." The word came out low, steady. Vincent's smile didn't waver. "I'd encourage you to think about it." I said no. "Get out of my house." For a moment the room was perfectly still. Vincent studied her the way a man studies a lock before deciding which tool to use. Then he nodded once, not to her, but to one of the men behind him. It happened fast. The larger man crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed Richard by the collar and shoved him against the wall. Harper screamed. Before she could move, the man drove his knee into her father's thigh, A brutal, targeted blow that dropped Richard to the floor, gasping. "Stop!" Harper lunged forward, but the second man caught her arm and held her in place. She fought, pulled. Her wrist burned under his grip. Vincent hadn't moved. He watched the scene with the calm expression of a man observing a minor inconvenience. "That," he said, gesturing toward Richard, who was now clutching his leg on the floor, blood soaking through his trousers where the impact had split the skin, "is a demonstration, not a punishment. There's a difference." He straightened his coat. "You'll come around, Miss Lennox. They always do." He turned and walked out. The two men followed. The door closed with a click that sounded like a sentence. Harper dropped to the floor beside her father. Dad, look at me." Richard was shaking. The wound on his leg was deep enough to bleed, but not enough to require a hospital. Calculated, like everything else Vincent Hale did. Harper pressed a kitchen towel against it, her hands trembling, her jaw locked so tight her teeth ached. "I'm sorry," Richard whispered. "Harper, I'm so sorry. I never meant—" "Don't." She cut him off. Not with anger. With something worse. The flat, hollow tone of someone who has just been betrayed by the one person who was supposed to keep her safe. She cleaned the wound in silence, found bandages in the bathroom cabinet, wrapped his leg with hands that were steady on the outside and falling apart underneath. He cried the whole time. She didn't. When she was done, she sat on the floor with her back against the couch and stared at the wall. The house was quiet. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, Vincent Hale's car pulled away, and the street returned to the kind of stillness that felt like a lie. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Harvey. His name on the screen sent a crack through the wall she was building. She could feel it, the pull toward him, the desperate need to hear his voice and let him hold her until the world stopped spinning. She pressed decline. Then she pulled her knees to her chest and stayed very still, breathing through a pain that had no edges, no bottom, and no name she could find in any of the languages she knew. She didn't sleep that night. Harper lay on her childhood bed staring at a ceiling she had memorized before she could read, and played the same thought on a loop until it wore grooves into her mind. If she told Harvey, he would come. He would stand between her and Vincent Hale without a second thought, without weighing the cost, without caring what it meant for his own safety. She knew this the way she knew the shape of his hands, completely, without question. And that was exactly why she couldn't tell him. She had seen what Vincent Hale was capable of, the casual cruelty, the precision of it. A man like that didn't threaten. He delivered. And Harvey, with his wide shoulders and protective instincts and the stubborn belief that love could fix anything, would walk straight into a fight he couldn't win. Not because he was weak, because the rules of that fight weren't fair, and they never would be. The thought of his face bruised, his body hurt, his life damaged because of a debt that was never his. It sat on her chest like a stone. She could barely breathe around it. By dawn, the decision had taken shape. She would end it. Cleanly. Completely. She would give him no reason to stay, no door to come back through, no crack wide enough for hope. She would make him believe it was her choice, that she wanted to leave, that the love was gone, that what they had was over. She would lie to the one person she had never lied to, and it would destroy her, but he would be safe. She picked up her phone and typed a message with fingers that barely held still. She asked him to meet her at the park, the one with the old benches near the fountain. She said she needed to talk. He replied in seconds. He always did, asking if everything was okay. She didn't answer. 2 hours later, she sat on the bench and waited. The park was quiet for midday. A few pigeons near the fountain, a woman pushing a stroller on the far path, the hum of traffic muffled by the trees. The air was cool and she pulled her coat tighter, though the cold she felt had nothing to do with the weather. She saw him before he reached her. He walked the way he always walked, steady, purposeful, slightly faster than necessary. His coat was open. His jaw was set in that way it got when he was worried, a tension along the line that softened only when he looked at her. She watched his face change as he got closer. The concern shifted. Something in her posture, maybe. Something in the way she wasn't smiling. He sat beside her. Close, his knee touched hers. "What's going on?" She had rehearsed this. She had practiced the words in her bathroom mirror, watching her own mouth form syllables that felt like poison. She had told herself she could do it without breaking. She was wrong. "I need to end this, Harvey." He didn't move, didn't blink. The words hit him, but they didn't land. They bounced off the surface of his understanding like something spoken in a language he didn't recognize. "What?" "Us. I need to end us. Harper, I've been thinking about this for a while." The lie tasted like metal on her tongue. "I don't think this is what I want anymore. I need to be on my own. I need space to figure out what I actually need." His body had gone still beside her. Not the warm stillness of their quiet moments. A different kind. Frozen. That doesn't make sense. His voice was low, careful, like he was handling something fragile. 2 days ago, we were talking about the house we'd buy. You were laughing about the color of the shutters. I know, and I realized I was just going along with it. I wasn't being honest with myself. She couldn't look at him while she said it. She focused on the fountain ahead, on the way the water caught the light, on anything that wasn't the sound of his breathing changing beside her. "Look at me." She didn't. "Harper, look at me." His hand found her chin, gentle, the way he always touched her, like she was something precious. He turned her face toward him, and the moment their eyes met, her rehearsed composure cracked down the center. His eyes were searching hers, desperate, brown and warm and full of a panic she had never seen in him before. Harvey, who was always steady, always sure, now looking at her like the ground beneath him was opening. "Why are you doing this to us?" "Because I need to." "That's not a reason." His thumb moved across her jaw. "We love each other. You know that. I know that. Whatever this is, whatever happened, we can fix it." "There's nothing to fix." "Then why are you crying?" She hadn't realized. The tears had come without permission, silent and relentless, spilling down her cheeks and over his fingers, where they still held her face. She pressed her eyes shut. He pulled her closer. His forehead touched hers. She could feel his breath, unsteady now, ragged, and the warmth of his skin and the faint scent of soap and cedar that she had memorized on their very first day. Every detail was a knife. "Don't do this," he whispered. "Please. Whatever it is, just tell me. I'll do anything." That was the word that nearly broke her. Anything. Because she knew he meant it, and that was exactly the problem. She opened her eyes, looked at him from inches away. She could see the moisture gathering along his lower lashes, the slight tremble in his jaw that he was trying so hard to control. Her prince, her beautiful, stubborn, endlessly devoted prince who would tear himself apart to keep her. She had to make him let go. "I don't want this life, Harvey. I don't want us. Please don't make this harder than it already is." His hands dropped. Not because he wanted to let go, because the words hit something inside him that stole his strength. He sat back, stared at her with an expression she would carry for the rest of her life. Not anger, not confusion, but something far worse. Heartbreak, raw and total. "You don't mean that." "I do." "You don't." And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate. His hands found her face again, pulling her in, and his mouth pressed against hers with everything he had, every morning, every laugh, every whispered plan, every time he tucked her hair behind her ear in the wind. She tasted salt and heat and him, and her hands gripped the front of his coat because her body refused to do what her mind demanded. She kissed him back. One last time. She kissed him like a goodbye to the life she was supposed to have. And the sound that left her throat, a small broken thing between a breath and a sob, was the most honest sound she had made all day. When she pulled away, his eyes were wet, open, shattered. "You need to accept this," she said, her voice barely holding. "I won't change my mind." She stood up, her legs shook. He reached for her arm. "Harper." She pulled free, and she walked away, fast, then faster, until walking became something close to running, and the distance between them grew, and the sound of her name in his voice faded behind her like the last note of a song she would never hear again. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen him, still on the bench, head bowed, hands empty, crying without any effort to stop. Marcus Reed picked up on the first ring. He always did when Harvey called late. "Talk to me." The voice on the other end didn't sound like Harvey. It was stripped, hollow, like someone had reached inside him and pulled out everything that held the words together. She ended it. Marcus sat up in bed. He pulled the phone closer to his ear, as if proximity could help him understand what he had just heard. "Harper, she said she doesn't want this, that she doesn't want us. She just left." A pause, a breath that hitched in the middle. "She ran, Marcus. She looked me in the eyes and ran." Marcus said nothing for a long moment. He was a man who dealt in evidence, in patterns, in the small inconsistencies that most people missed, and everything about this was inconsistent. "That doesn't make any sense." "I know. 3 days ago you told me she was picking out curtains for a house you haven't bought yet." "I know. People don't go from curtains to goodbye in 3 days, not without a reason." Harvey's silence was louder than anything he could have said. Marcus could hear it in the empty space, the sound of a man sitting alone in a room that still smelled like her, trying to reconcile the woman who kissed him like the world was ending with the woman who said she didn't want him anymore. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. "I don't know." A long pause. "I'm going to try to talk to her. Tomorrow. She wasn't making sense. Something is wrong." "I agree. Something is very wrong." He tried the next day. Called her phone at 8 in the morning, then again at noon, then at 4. Each call went to voicemail after the same number of rings. She was watching it ring and choosing not to answer. He left a message after the third call, kept it short, said he loved her, that he wasn't angry, that he just wanted to understand. No reply. He went to her father's house that evening, knocked on the door for 5 minutes. He could see the light on in her room upstairs, the soft glow behind the curtain that told him she was there, awake, listening to him knock and choosing to stay behind a door she had never locked against him before. He left, came back the next day, and the day after. He brought her favorite tea once, chamomile, loose leaf, from the shop near the bookstore. He left it on the doorstep with a note that said only, "I'm still here." The tea was still there the next morning, untouched, and it took every ounce of his composure not to put his fist through the wall. The days blurred. He went to work. He cleaned teeth, examined gums, talked to patients about flossing with a voice so flat that his receptionist asked if he was feeling ill. He told her he was fine. He wasn't fine. He was operating on something less than instinct, a mechanical routine that got him from morning to evening without requiring him to think. At night, the apartment was unbearable. Her toothbrush was still in the cup by the sink. A book she had been reading sat open on the nightstand, spine cracked at page 212, waiting for her to come back and finish it. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the tea she brewed every morning, and he found himself standing in front of the cabinet where he kept her mug, the one with the chipped handle she refused to replace, staring at it like it held answers. He didn't move her things, didn't touch them. They stayed exactly where she left them because moving them would mean accepting that she was gone, and he was not ready to accept something he didn't believe. 9 days after the bench, he sent her a long message. He wrote it 3 times before sending. He told her about the bookstore, how he had gone on Saturday by himself and stood in the classics aisle and felt her absence like a missing wall. He told her he wasn't sleeping. He told her he still didn't understand and that he would wait as long as it took for her to explain. Nothing. 11 days. 12. He called Marcus every night, not because he had anything new to say, but because the silence of the apartment was louder than he could stand. Marcus listened, asked careful questions, offered no false comfort. On the 14th day, a message arrived. It was short, 5 lines, each one a blade. "Please don't come to the house again. Please stop calling. I need you to forget about me and move on with your life. I'm sorry for everything. Please respect this." Harvey sat on the edge of his bed and read it 4 times. His hands were steady, his face was dry. But something inside him, something deep, something structural, buckled under the weight of those words, like a beam giving way. He called Marcus. She wants me to forget her. Marcus was quiet. I can't do that. Harvey's voice cracked. I won't. I know. Something happened, Marcus. Something she's not telling me. That woman loves me. I felt it in the way she kissed me on that bench. That wasn't a goodbye from someone who stopped caring. That was a goodbye from someone who had no choice. Marcus didn't argue. He didn't need to. He had been thinking the same thing since the first call. I'm going to wait for her, Harvey said. I don't care how long it takes. I'm going to find out what happened, and I'm going to wait. Then I'll help you. Meanwhile, 4 miles across the city, Harper sat on the floor of her bedroom with her phone in her lap, staring at the message she had just sent. The screen blurred through tears that hadn't stopped since the bench. She hadn't eaten a full meal in days. The manuscript on her desk was untouched, the cursor on her laptop blinking on the same page it had been on for 2 weeks. A sentence half translated, the words refusing to come. She spent her days in that room. Door closed, curtains drawn. She came out to cook for her father, to change his bandages, to move through the house like a woman made of glass, functional on the outside and empty within. Richard watched her from his armchair with eyes full of guilt so heavy it seemed to press him further into the cushion each day. He tried to speak to her several times. She answered in the fewest words possible. She was not ready to forgive. She didn't know if she ever would be. 2 weeks after the breakup, a familiar car pulled up outside the house. Harper was in the kitchen when she heard the engine. Her body recognized it before her mind did. The blood left her face, her hands stopped mid-motion over the sink, and the air in her lungs turned to cement. Vincent Hale walked through the door without knocking. Time to discuss our arrangement, Miss Lennox. She stood in the hallway, hands at her sides, forcing herself not to shake. I need more time. You've had time. My father can't walk properly. He needs care. Let me get him stable, and I'll... The words caught. She swallowed. I'll do what you want. Vincent studied her. His eyes were flat, calculating. She could see the math behind them, the cost-benefit analysis of patience versus force. 1 month, he said. Not a day more. He turned and left. The door clicked shut. Harper sank to the floor. 1 month, 30 days before she became the property of a man who looked at her the way someone looks at a debt paid in full. 30 days with the ghost of Harvey's voice in her ear, telling her he was still there, still waiting, still believing. She pressed her forehead to her knees and made a sound that wasn't quite crying. It was smaller than that, quieter, the sound of someone slowly being erased. Marcus Reed didn't believe in coincidences. 20 years as a detective had taught him that when something didn't fit, it was because a piece was missing, not because the puzzle was wrong. And this puzzle was missing half its pieces. He sat at his desk on a Wednesday morning, the precinct buzzing around him, and opened a blank file on his computer. At the top, he typed a name, Harper Lennox. Below it, a question he had been carrying for 2 weeks. Why would a woman who was clearly in love walk away without a real reason? He had watched Harvey and Harper together. Not often. He wasn't the type to hover around couples, but enough. He had seen her hand find Harvey's arm without looking. A gesture so automatic, it spoke of something deeper than habit. He had seen Harvey's entire face change when she entered a room. Those two weren't playing at love. They were drowning in it. So either Harper had suffered a complete personality shift in 48 hours, or something had forced her hand. Marcus didn't believe in personality shifts either. He started where he always started. The edges. A few database searches gave him the basics on Richard Lennox. Retired municipal worker, widowed, no criminal record. Clean credit history up until about 18 months ago when things unraveled. Missed payments, a second mortgage, a pattern of cash withdrawals that followed no logical schedule. Small amounts at first, then larger, then amounts that didn't match any normal expense. Gambling. The pattern was textbook. But gambling alone didn't explain the breakup. People gambled, went into debt, lost their houses. It was sad, but it didn't make their daughters abandon the love of their lives overnight. There had to be a creditor, someone specific, someone with enough leverage to change the equation. He made 3 phone calls that afternoon. The first was to a contact in financial crimes. The second was to an informant who worked the edges of the city's underground betting scene. The third was to a bartender he had known for years who ran a place near the harbour where men with expensive problems went to make them worse. The bartender gave him a name: Vincent Hale. Marcus typed it into his system and watched the screen fill. No convictions. A few investigations that went nowhere. Connections to illegal gambling operations, loan sharking and intimidation, all suspected, none proven. The kind of man who kept his hands clean by hiring others to get theirs dirty. A photograph loaded. Heavy face, flat eyes. Marcus printed it and pinned it to the small board behind his desk. He stared at it for a long time. That evening he drove to Richard Lennox's neighborhood. He didn't stop at the house. Parked 2 blocks away and watched. Noted the cars that passed. The one with tinted windows that circled the block twice before disappearing. He wrote down the plate number. The next day, he visited the harbour bar. Ordered a drink he didn't touch. Talked to the bartender in the low, unhurried way that made people forget they were speaking to a cop. Hale, what's his game? Cards mostly, private tables, high stakes. The bartender wiped a glass without looking up. He doesn't play to win money. He plays to win people. What does that mean? Means he picks his marks, finds someone with a weakness, a habit, a debt, a soft spot. Then he squeezes until he gets what he actually wants. Marcus felt the pieces clicking. How deep is the current one? Deep enough that money stopped being the point a long time ago. He left the bar and sat in his car for 10 minutes without starting the engine. Rain had begun, a fine drizzle that blurred the windshield and turned streetlights into smeared gold. He thought about Harvey, about the ring in a sock drawer, about his best friend's voice on the phone every night, raw, gutted, held together by nothing but the stubborn belief that the woman he loved hadn't stopped loving him. He picked up his phone and called. Not to share what he had found, the picture was still forming. He called because it was Thursday night and Harvey shouldn't be alone. How are you doing? Same. Eating? Enough. That's not an answer. A small sound, almost a laugh. I had toast. Harvey. I know. A sigh. I went to the bookstore today. Stood in the aisle where we met. The clerk asked if I was looking for something. His voice dropped. I almost told her I was looking for everything. Marcus closed his eyes. I'm working on something, he said carefully. I can't say more yet. But I need you to trust me. Silence. Do you trust me? With my life? Then hold on a little longer. I've been holding on since the bench. They hung up. Marcus sat in the dark car, rain tapping the roof, and looked at the notes across the passenger seat. Vincent Hale's name stared back at him, sharp, angular, like the man himself. He was close. He could feel it the way he felt it on every case about to crack. That tightening in the gut, the quiet certainty that the truth was just beneath the surface, waiting for someone patient enough to pull it into the light. He would be that someone. Not just because it was his job. Because Harvey Langford was the closest thing he had to a brother, and nobody was going to keep that man from the woman who was made for him. Rain had been falling for 3 days, and Harvey's apartment had never felt so large. He stood in the kitchen at 6 in the morning with a mug of coffee he wouldn't finish, watching water run down the window in crooked lines. The apartment was clean, not lived-in clean, but the kind that happens when a man scrubs counters at 2 in the morning, because lying in bed with his thoughts is no longer an option. Her toothbrush was still in the cup by the sink. A book she had been reading sat open on the nightstand, spine cracked at page 212, waiting for her to come back and finish it. He didn't move her things. Moving them would mean accepting she was gone, and he was not ready to accept something he didn't believe. Work was the only thing that still had shape. He went to the clinic, greeted patients, performed procedures with the same precision he had always had. But between appointments, when the chair was empty and the room quiet, his mind went where it always went. The bench, her face, the taste of that last kiss. He kept the ring in his coat pocket now. The drawer felt too far away, too hidden. In his pocket, he could press his palm against it during the day and feel the outline through the fabric. Not a reminder of what he lost. A reminder of what he was waiting to get back. His receptionist, Linda, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for pretense, stopped him one afternoon. "You look terrible." "Thank you, Linda. I'm serious. You've lost weight. Your eyes look like you've been fighting with your pillow and losing." She crossed her arms. "What happened to that girl? The pretty one who brought you lunch on Tuesdays?" His jaw tightened. He picked up the next chart without answering. Linda watched him walk down the hall. She didn't ask again. Across the city, Harper existed in a house that felt like a holding cell. She woke each morning with the same weight on her chest, a physical thing, real as a hand pressing down. She made breakfast for her father, changed his bandages. The leg was healing, the skin knitting itself together in a way that felt almost offensive. How could something repair itself when everything else was falling apart? Richard tried. Every day, in small ways she noticed and could not yet accept. He made her tea once, got the temperature wrong, the steep time wrong, everything wrong, and left it outside her door with a note that said only, "I'm sorry." She drank it cold, hours later, because wasting it felt like wasting her mother's memory. She sat at her desk most afternoons, staring at the manuscript she couldn't touch. The French novel about a woman who rebuilt from nothing. She was supposed to translate a story about resilience, while her own was crumbling word by word. She thought about Harvey constantly, not in waves, in currents, a steady underground pull that never stopped. She thought about the way he stood in the kitchen with that fake serious face, the warmth of his hand on her back when he corrected her posture. The way he said Angel, not like a pet name, but like a fact he had discovered and couldn't unlearn. Some nights, she held her phone and scrolled to his name, just to see it. She never called, never wrote. But she pressed her thumb against the screen where his name glowed, and sometimes that was enough to survive another hour. 3 weeks had passed since the bench. The deadline was shrinking. Marcus, meanwhile, was not sleeping much either. His investigation had spread from the passenger seat of his car to his kitchen table, then to a second board at home. Red threads connected names, dates, locations. Vincent Hale's network was wider than he had initially thought. Underground poker games across 3 neighborhoods, a web of enforcers, a trail of people who owed him things far more valuable than money. He had tracked the plate number from the car outside Richard's house. It belonged to one of Hale's known associates. He had pulled phone records, carefully, legally, building each step on solid ground so nothing could be thrown out later. 2 more informants confirmed the same pattern. Hale targeted vulnerable men, manipulated games, and extracted payment in forms courts rarely saw. One informant said something that made Marcus's pen stop moving. "He's been talking about a woman, younger, says she's part of a deal, been bragging at the tables like she's already his." Marcus's stomach turned. He drove home with a clarity that felt like ice forming behind his eyes. The pieces were almost all in place. The debt, the manipulation, the coercion. He understood the picture now. He needed 1 more week, maybe less, to build a case that would hold, not suspicion, proof, the kind that locked doors and kept them locked. He picked up his phone, not to call Harvey, not yet. The truth had to come complete. Half a story would send Harvey through Hale's front door with nothing but fists and fury. Instead, he sent a text to his contact at the district attorney's office. "Need a meeting tomorrow, urgent." Then he sat in the dark of his living room, looking at the board, and made a silent promise to a woman he had never spoken to, but was fighting for anyway. "Hold on, Harper, we're coming." The file was spread across Marcus's kitchen table like a map to someone else's nightmare. Photographs, bank records, witness statements, phone logs. A timeline that started with a grieving widower at a card table 18 months ago and ended with a woman being traded like currency. Every piece connected, every thread pulled tight. Marcus had spent the last 72 hours without sleep. The district attorney's office had given him the green light. 2 detectives from his unit were assisting, though neither knew the personal connection. To them, it was a case of coercion and illegal gambling. To Marcus, it was the reason his best friend couldn't sleep. He read through the file one last time. He needed to be certain, because what he was about to do would change Harvey's life, and it had to be built on ground that wouldn't shift. The evidence told a clear story. Vincent Hale had identified Richard Lennox months before approaching him. He had studied the man, his grief, his growing dependence on the tables. He had placed associates at the same games, steered outcomes, let Richard win just enough to keep him coming back. Then he had tightened, raised stakes, extended credit no legitimate person would offer. And when the debt became impossible, he had presented the solution he had planned from the beginning. Harper. Marcus confirmed it through 3 separate sources: the forced marriage arrangement, the visit to the house, the injury to Richard's leg. A witness had seen Hale's men entering and leaving that night, and pharmacy records showed Harper purchasing bandages the following morning. The informant's testimony about Hale bragging at the tables completed the picture. It was enough. More than enough. He called Harvey. "Can you come over? Tonight." Harvey didn't ask questions, said he'd be there in 20 minutes. Arrived in 15. Marcus opened the door and saw a man he barely recognized. Harvey had always carried himself with quiet steadiness, shoulders back, eyes clear, the kind of presence that filled a room without demanding it. The man on the doorstep looked hollowed. His coat hung looser. His eyes had the flat, bruised look of someone who had been staring at walls for weeks. But he was there, still standing. "Sit down," Marcus said. Harvey sat at the kitchen table, looked at the papers, the photographs, the threads on the board. His face changed, gradually, like a sky shifting before a storm. "What is this?" Marcus sat across from him, hands flat on the table. He spoke the way he spoke to victims' families, clear, steady, without decoration. "Harper didn't leave you because she stopped loving you." Harvey went still. "Her father has a gambling addiction. He got deep with a man named Vincent Hale, a loan shark, an illegal gambling operator, a predator who targets vulnerable people." Marcus paused. "The debt grew beyond anything Richard could repay. Hale manipulated the games to ensure that. And when the debt was high enough, he offered a different kind of payment." Harvey's breathing changed, shallow, controlled, the kind of breathing a man does when his body is preparing for something his mind hasn't caught up to. "What payment?" "Harper. Marriage to Hale. That was the deal. When Hale came to collect, she refused. So he had one of his men injure her father as a warning." Marcus slid a photograph forward, the pharmacy receipt, time-stamped. "She broke up with you because she knew if you found out, you'd go after Hale yourself. She was protecting you." Silence filled the kitchen. Harvey stared at the photograph. His fingers were spread on the table, and Marcus could see the tremor running through them. Not fear, but something far more dangerous. A vibration, the kind that precedes an earthquake. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. He threatened her. Yes. He hurt her father in front of her. Yes. And she... His voice cracked. He pressed his fist against his mouth, breathed until the crack sealed. "She gave me up to keep me safe." "That's exactly what she did." Harvey stood. The chair scraped the floor. He walked to the window, placed both hands on the frame, head bowed. His shoulders rose and fell. "I'm going to find him." "No, you're not." Harvey turned, eyes wet, jaw locked. "Marcus, I have enough to put him away, real evidence, but I need one more week to formalize the arrest. If you go near him now, you compromise everything. He walks free, and she's in more danger than before." Every muscle in Harvey's body was pulling toward the door. Marcus could see it, the war between fury and reason, between the man who wanted to tear Vincent Hale apart and the man who knew that patience was the only weapon that would actually work. "1 week," Marcus said. "Give me 1 week, and I will make sure that man never touches her again." The silence stretched. "She still loves me." Harvey said it like a man seeing sunlight after a month underground. "She never stopped." Harvey pressed his palms against his eyes. His shoulders shook. A sound escaped, something between a laugh and a sob, rough and broken and full of relief, so sharp it cut on the way out. He lowered his hands. His eyes were red. But something had returned that Marcus hadn't seen in weeks. Fire. 1 week, Harvey said. Not a day more. Not a day more. Harvey reached into his coat pocket and closed his fingers around the ring, held it there, pressing it against his palm, and felt his heartbeat steady for the first time in a month. She was still his. She had always been his. And he was coming. 7 days. 168 hours. Harvey counted every single one. He went to work. He sat with patience. He held instruments with hands that had never been steadier, because now the stillness had purpose. Not the numbness of a man broken, but the controlled patience of a man waiting for the right moment to move. He didn't call Harper, didn't go to her house. Every instinct screamed to drive across the city, knock down the door, pull her into his arms. But Marcus's words held him like an anchor. If you go near him now, you compromise everything. So he waited. And the waiting was a war, not against an enemy, but against himself. Tuesday. He reorganized his instrument trays 3 times. Linda noticed but said nothing. Wednesday. He drove past the bookstore on his way home and pulled over. Sat in the car, staring at the window where the classics aisle was visible from the street. He could almost see her in there, on the floor between the shelves, legs crossed, biting her lower lip over a sentence that moved her. The image was so vivid it took his breath. He drove away before the ache swallowed him. Thursday. Marcus called. The district attorney had reviewed the evidence and approved the warrant. 2 more witnesses had come forward, former victims of Hale who had never had enough protection to speak. The case was airtight now. We move on Monday, Marcus said. Monday. 3 more days. Stay away until it's done. After the arrest, you go to her, not before. Friday passed like cement drying. Saturday was worse. He cleaned the apartment, but differently this time. Not the manic scrubbing of a man escaping his thoughts. He cleaned with intention, changed the sheets, bought fresh flowers, white ones, because he remembered her saying that white flowers looked like they were keeping a secret. He placed them on the kitchen table where she used to sit with her manuscripts and her tea. He set her mug out, the one with the chipped handle, washed it, dried it, placed it next to the kettle. Sunday was the longest day of his life. He sat on the couch with his phone beside him and thought about the first time he saw her, the stretch of her arm toward that top shelf, the way she turned and the smile froze on her face. He thought about the cafe, the steam between them, the moment she wrapped both hands around her cup and told him coffee made her hands shake. He thought about the way she said Prince for the first time, the word landing on him like something he would carry for the rest of his life. He pressed his hand against the ring in his pocket. Tomorrow. On the other side of the city, Harper sat on the edge of her bed counting the days she had left. 4. Thursday was the deadline. In 4 days, Vincent Hale would come for her, and she would walk out of this house into a life that felt like a coffin with a pulse. She had stopped crying, not because the pain had dulled, but because her body had run dry. She moved through the house like something mechanical, cooking, cleaning, changing her father's bandage one last time, though the wound was nearly healed. Richard could walk again. He limped, but he managed. He watched his daughter with eyes so heavy with guilt, they seemed to pull his whole face downward. He tried to speak to her on Sunday evening, standing in her doorway while she folded clothes she wouldn't need much longer. Harper, please. She didn't turn around. I would give anything to undo it. She folded a sweater, set it on the pile. Her hands didn't shake. There was nothing left to shake. I know, Dad. 3 words, flat. He stood there for a long moment, then limped down the hallway, each step marking the silence like a metronome counting toward something neither of them could stop. Monday morning, Marcus arrived at the precinct at 5. The operation was clean. 4 officers, 2 unmarked vehicles. A warrant signed by a judge who had read the file twice and said he wished he could sign it harder. They reached Hale's residence at 6:30. The house was large, too large for one man, built on other people's suffering. Marcus knocked, announced himself. The door opened, and Vincent Hale stood in a silk robe with the expression of a man who had never once considered that consequences applied to him. The expression changed when Marcus held up the warrant. Vincent Hale. You're under arrest for coercion, illegal gambling operations, extortion, assault, and intimidation. This is absurd. Turn around, please. Do you have any idea who... I know exactly who you are. Marcus stepped forward. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of every sleepless night, every phone call from Harvey, every piece of evidence pulled from the dark. You're the man who thought he could buy a woman like a debt. And you just learned what happens when you mess with the wrong one. The handcuffs clicked shut. As the car pulled away, Marcus stood on the sidewalk, took a breath that felt like the first real one in weeks, and pulled out his phone. One message. It's done. He's in custody. Go get your girl. Harvey read it standing in his kitchen, next to the white flowers, and the chipped mug, and the clean sheets, and the ring that had been waiting in his pocket for weeks. His hands trembled. He grabbed his coat and walked out the door. Harper was folding the last of her clothes when the doorbell rang. She froze. It was Monday, 3 days before the deadline. Vincent Hale had no reason to come early. He was a man who kept to schedules. But fear doesn't reason, it floods. She set the blouse down and walked to the top of the stairs. Her father was in his armchair. He hadn't moved toward the door. His face had the same drained look it always carried, but something in his posture had shifted. He was listening, head tilted, like a man trying to identify a sound that didn't match what he expected. The bell rang again. Harper descended slowly. Her pulse was loud in her ears. She reached the door and pressed her hand flat against it, as if she could feel through the wood who stood on the other side. She opened it. The world stopped. Harvey stood on the doorstep. His coat was open despite the cold, his hair slightly disheveled. His eyes were red, son, not from crying, but from something burning behind them. Relief, anger, love, all tangled so tightly she couldn't separate them. He looked at her the way a man looks at air after being held underwater. Harvey. His name came out broken. I know everything. 3 words. They landed on her chest and cracked it open. Marcus found it all. The debt, the threats, what Hale did to your father and everything. His voice was thick, pressed against something that wanted to spill. And I know why you left me. She shook her head. Not denial, instinct. The reflex of a woman who had spent weeks holding a wall in place and now felt it crumbling. She had built that wall to keep him safe, and he had walked through it like paper. You weren't supposed to find out. I know. I did it because he would have hurt you. If anything had happened to you because of me. He stepped forward and pulled her against him. The sound she made was something she hadn't known she was carrying. A raw, breaking exhale that shook her entire body. She pressed her face into his chest and gripped the front of his coat with both fists. He wrapped his arms around her, tight, complete, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other pressed flat against her spine. He smelled the same. Soap. Cedar. Home. He's gone, Harvey murmured into her hair. Hale was arrested this morning. Marcus built the case. Coercion, extortion, assault. He's facing years. He will never come near you again. She pulled back, just enough to look at his face. Say it again. It's over, Harper. A sob escaped. Then another. She pressed her forehead against his collarbone and let every tear she had been rationing fall at once. He held her through all of it. Didn't move. Didn't rush. Just stood in that doorway with his arms around her, like a man who had finally found the one place he was supposed to be. When her breathing slowed, he took her face in both hands, the way he always did, like holding something the world didn't deserve. His thumbs moved across her cheekbones, wiping tears with a tenderness that made new ones form. I need to tell you something, he said. She waited. He reached into his coat pocket. His hand trembled. She saw it, the fine shake in his fingers, and it undid her because Harvey's hands never shook. He opened his palm. The ring sat there, white gold, a single oval stone that caught the grey morning light. She stared at it and felt something she thought had died come back to life. I bought this before the bench, he said. I've carried it every day since, in my pocket, against my hand, because putting it away would have meant giving up, and I was never going to give up on you. He lowered himself to one knee, right there on the doorstep, with cold air around them and a city that kept moving while their world stood still. Marry me, Harper. Let me spend every day of my life making sure you never feel alone again. She was crying so hard she couldn't see him clearly, but she didn't need to. She knew every line of that face. Yes. The word came out small, fragile, enormous. He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that shook the entire time, and when the cool metal settled against her skin, she dropped to her knees too, and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was a kiss full of every night she had cried alone, every morning he had pressed his hand to a ring in his pocket, every hour spent apart pretending to survive. Salt and heat and breath shared between two people who had been drowning and finally found each other again. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. "Come home with me," he whispered. "Right now. I don't want you spending another night in this house." She looked at him, then over her shoulder, toward the hallway where her half-packed clothes waited, and her father sat in silence. "Let me get my things." He nodded and kissed the ring on her finger, a small fierce press of his lips against the stone, and she felt the gesture travel through her hand, up her arm, and settle somewhere deep inside her chest, where a light she thought had gone out flickered back to life. It took less than an hour to pack a life. Harper moved through her room with a focus that surprised even her. Clothes into the large suitcase, books into a box Harvey found in the hallway closet, the framed photograph of her mother, taken in the garden the summer before the diagnosis. Her face tilted toward the sun, she wrapped in a sweater and placed on top. Harvey carried things to the car without a word. He didn't rush her, didn't suggest what to take or leave. He simply moved between the bedroom and the front door, and every time he passed her, he touched some part of her, a hand on her arm, fingers brushing the small of her back, a press of his lips against her temple. Small anchors, reminders that he was real. Richard sat in his armchair the entire time. He watched the suitcases pass through the living room with the expression of a man watching a verdict delivered in slow motion. He didn't try to help. When the last bag was by the door, Harvey touched her shoulder. "Take your time, I'll be in the car." She nodded. He left. The house settled into a silence heavier than the walls. She walked to the living room doorway. Her father looked up. His eyes were wet. The creases on his face seemed deeper, as though guilt had carved new lines overnight. "I hope that one day you can forgive me." Harper stood very still. She thought about what she wanted to say. A year of hidden debts. A lifetime of trust shattered in one desperate night. The sound of his body hitting the wall. The weeks locked in her room. The tears. The man she had pushed away. All because her father had sat at a table and gambled with the one thing that should have been untouchable. She thought about her mother, what she would have said. But her mother wasn't here, and Harper was no longer the girl who could absorb everyone's pain and still stand upright. The version standing in this doorway was harder in places that used to be soft. She didn't say she forgave him. She didn't say she hated him. "Take care of yourself, Dad." Richard nodded, his chin trembling, and looked at his hands. She picked up her bag and walked out. The car ride was quiet. Harvey drove with one hand on the wheel and the other holding hers, his thumb moving in slow circles across her knuckles. The city passed outside, buildings, traffic, the bookstore on the corner where everything began. And Harper watched it all with the strange clarity of someone who had just stepped out of a burning building and could finally feel the air. When they reached the apartment, he carried her bags inside while she stood in the doorway. She saw the flowers first, white ones in a glass vase on the kitchen table. Then her mug, the chipped handle washed and placed beside the kettle. The apartment was clean, the bed made with fresh sheets, and afternoon light came through the window at the angle that always made the living room glow. He had prepared for her. The realization moved through her like a wave, slow, deep, reaching places that had been numb for weeks. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Harvey set the last bag down and turned. He saw her face and crossed the room in 3 steps. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." She shook her head, smiled through wet eyes. "For the first time in weeks, nothing is wrong." He pulled her close. She rested her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. Steady, strong, the most reliable sound in her world. His fingers found the nape of her neck and settled there. "I missed you." His voice was rough. "Every day. I missed you so much I forgot what a full breath felt like." She tilted her face up. His eyes were dark, holding hers with an intensity that made the air between them thin. She reached up and traced the line of his jaw, a gesture she had imagined 1,000 times in her locked bedroom, her hand reaching for a face that wasn't there. He turned his head and pressed his lips into her palm. The warmth of his mouth against her skin sent a shiver through her. His hand tightened at her waist. "Stay with me," he whispered against her hand. "Not just tonight, every night. I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her, slowly at first, careful, confirming she was real. His hands moved to her face, cradling her, and she felt every wall she had built collapse at once. She kissed him back with everything she had been holding, the loneliness, the fear, the desperate ache of wanting him while pretending she didn't. The kiss deepened. She pulled him closer by the collar of his shirt, and he made a sound against her mouth, quiet, unguarded, that told her he had been holding on just as hard. He lifted her and carried her toward the bedroom, his forehead against hers, their breath tangled. "My angel," he murmured. "You're home." She closed her eyes and let herself fall into the only arms that had ever made the world feel safe. That night, they held nothing back. Every touch was a declaration, every whisper a promise. And when she cried, quietly in the dark, her face against his shoulder, he kissed each tear and told her she would never have to be brave alone again. They fell asleep tangled together, her hand over his heart, his arm around her as if, even in sleep, he refused to let go. The morning of the wedding, Harper woke before the sun. She lay still, listening to Harvey's breathing beside her, deep and even, the rhythm of a man who had finally stopped bracing for loss. His arm was draped across her waist, heavy with sleep. 1 month. That was all it had taken to build a wedding. Some people would call it fast. Harper called it overdue. She slipped out of bed carefully, pressing her lips to his knuckles before setting his hand on the pillow. She padded to the kitchen in bare feet and stood by the window, watching the sky lighten over the rooftops. The white flowers on the table had been replaced twice since that first Monday, each time by Harvey, who never mentioned doing it. She made tea, held the chipped mug with both hands, and thought about her mother. She had dreamed of this day since she was a girl. Her mother was supposed to be here, fussing over the dress, fixing her hair, crying before the ceremony started. The absence sat beside her like an empty chair at a dinner party, present because of what was missing. But the grief didn't swallow her this time. She had learned somewhere between the worst month of her life and the best that love and loss could share the same room without one cancelling the other. The ceremony was held in a small garden behind a stone chapel on the edge of the city. Harvey's mother had found it, a woman with the same brown eyes as her son, and a laugh that could fill a cathedral. 30 guests, white chairs, a string quartet that Harvey's sister had insisted on. "You are not getting married to a playlist," his sister had said, and that was the end of that. Harper got ready in a small room off the chapel. Harvey's sister helped with the buttons on the dress. Ivory, simple, sleeves ending just below the elbow, no train, no veil. Just the fabric against her skin and the ring catching light every time she moved her hand. She had invited her father, sent the invitation herself, written by hand, with the date and nothing else. She didn't know if he would come. He didn't. Marcus told her quietly before the ceremony. She nodded once, pressed her lips together. Then she picked up her bouquet of white flowers and walked toward the door. The garden was bathed in late afternoon gold, the kind of light that softens everything. The stone walls, the faces, the petals scattered along the path. The quartet played something low and warm, and Harper felt the vibration in her chest as she stepped outside. She saw him at the end of the aisle. Harvey stood with his hands clasped, shoulders straight, wearing a dark suit that made him look taller than he already was. Marcus was beside him, but Harvey wasn't looking at Marcus. He was looking at her. The moment their eyes met, his composure cracked, a tremor in his jaw, a brightness in his eyes. He leaned toward Marcus without turning his head. "My angel has never been more beautiful." Marcus smiled. Harper walked the aisle alone. Each step felt earned, not just the distance to the altar, but the distance between who she had been on that park bench and who she was now. A woman who had broken her own heart to protect someone she loved. A woman who had been found anyway. When she reached him, Harvey took her hands. His grip was firm, warm, slightly unsteady in a way that made her love him more. The vows came without notes. Harvey spoke first. His voice was low, rough at the edges, and every word landed on her like something physical. I spent a month without you, and I learned that everything I thought I knew about strength was wrong. Strength isn't standing alone. It's choosing someone and refusing to let go even when the world tries to pull you apart. His thumb traced her knuckle. You are my summer in every winter. I will love you when the days are easy, and I will love you when they aren't, and I will never stop choosing you. Harper's turn. Her voice was quieter, steadier than she expected. You waited for me. When I gave you every reason to walk away, you waited. You carried a ring in your pocket and flowers on your table and my mug by the kettle, because you never stopped believing I would come back. Her voice caught. She breathed through it. I spent my whole life translating other people's love stories. I never thought I'd get one of my own, but here you are, my prince, the man who held the door open when I was too afraid to walk through it. She squeezed his hands. I will love you through every season and every storm, and I will never run again. The officiants spoke. They said yes. And when Harvey pulled her close and kissed her, slow, deep, with both hands cradling her face the way he always did, the garden erupted in applause. Marcus wiped his eye with the back of his hand when he thought no one was looking. Harvey's mother cried openly in the front row without a shred of embarrassment. The kiss lasted longer than tradition required. Neither of them cared. The kitchen smelled like roasted garlic, and something sweet that Harvey's mother had been guarding in the oven since 11 o'clock. Harper sat at the long table in Harvey's parents' dining room with a 1-year-old boy on her lap. The baby had her eyes, light brown, almost golden, and Harvey's smile, that same effortless curve that had stopped her heart in a bookstore aisle, what felt like a lifetime ago. His name was Thomas, and he had recently discovered that banging a spoon against any surface was the highest form of entertainment. Thomas, please, Harper said gently, catching the spoon before it hit the water glass for the 4th time. He looked at her with wide, offended eyes. Then he laughed. The sound filled the room like a bell, and Harvey's sister shook her head from across the table. He's got your stubbornness, Harvey. Harvey appeared from the kitchen carrying a plate he set directly in front of Harper. Roasted chicken, potatoes, greens arranged the way she liked. He had already brought her water, adjusted the cushion behind her back twice, and taken Thomas for 20 minutes so she could rest her arms. She needs to eat, Harvey said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You've brought her 3 plates this morning, his sister said. She's eating for more than one. Harper's hand moved to the curve of her belly. 5 months. The fabric of her light dress stretched across the shape that had become her favorite sight in the mirror, proof of something growing, something built from everything they had survived. Harvey sat beside her and reached for Thomas, settling the boy on his knee while stealing a potato from her plate. I saw that, she said. No idea what you're talking about. Thomas grabbed his father's collar and tried to eat it. Harvey's mother emerged from the kitchen with the mystery dish, a golden cake topped with powdered sugar. She set it at the center of the table with quiet pride. Nobody touches it until I get the plates. Mom, I'm 34. And you'll wait like everyone else. Marcus, sitting at the end of the table with a glass of wine, laughed quietly. He had been promoted 6 months ago. He came to these family lunches regularly now, not because he had to, but because Harvey's family had become his. He caught Harper's eye across the table and raised his glass an inch. She returned it with a nod that carried more than a toast. It carried gratitude, the kind that lives in your bones and never fades. This man had given her life back. No words could hold the weight of that, so she had stopped trying. She simply made sure his glass was always full and his place at the table always set. Harper looked around the room. Harvey's father was telling a story about a fishing trip gone wrong in 3 different ways, complete with hand gestures that nearly toppled the salt shaker. His mother was cutting cake and pretending not to listen, while smiling at every punchline. His sister was trying to keep Thomas from the sugar bowl while texting someone who made her blush. This was her family now. The thought settled over her like a warm cloth, soft, earned exactly the right weight. Her father had stepped back 5 months ago. She had tried, drove him to the clinic herself, sat in the waiting room during his first sessions, brought him meals during the difficult early weeks. But the relapses came, one after another. Promises broken before they were a day old, until he came to her door one evening, thinner than before, and said he needed to go away for a while, that he wouldn't return until he had truly beaten it, that being near her, seeing the life she was building, made his failure feel heavier, and the heaviness made him reach for the only escape he knew. She had wanted to argue, wanted to hold him by the shoulders and tell him they could fight it together, but she had learned, painfully, slowly, that she couldn't save someone who kept letting go of the rope. So she let him go. And the grief of it sat beside her still, quiet, like a stone in her pocket she had learned to carry without limping. Harvey's hand found hers under the table. His thumb traced the band of her wedding ring, a habit from the first week of marriage he had never stopped. "You okay?" he murmured near her ear. She looked at him, at the boy on his knee, at the ring on her finger, and the belly between them, and the table full of people who loved her. "I'm perfect," he smiled. That slow, certain smile that still made her breath catch. "That's because you are, Angel." She laughed, eyes glistening, and leaned into him. "My prince." Thomas slammed his spoon on the table. The room erupted in laughter. Harvey kissed her temple. The cake was finally served. And the afternoon stretched on in the golden, unhurried way that only the best afternoons do. The ones you remember years later, not because anything remarkable happened, but because everyone you loved was in the same room, and that was more than enough. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.